I was standing in my garage in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, checking the oil on my chainsaw when Barbara Wellington knocked on my door like she was trying to break through it with her fists. The temperature had dropped to 20 degrees overnight, and the weather service was predicting an ice storm that would make history, but Barbara apparently had more pressing concerns than the safety of the neighborhood. "Trevor Brennan, I need to speak with you immediately," she called through the door, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. I set down the chainsaw and walked to the side door, opening it to find Barbara standing there in a cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Her blonde hair was styled in that typical Karen haircut, shorter in the back and angled toward her chin, and her lips were pressed into a thin line of disapproval. "Barbara, what's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. As the HOA president of Willow Creek Estates, Barbara had made it her personal mission to enforce every single rule in our community's covenant with the enthusiasm of a zealot. "I received a complaint about the noise coming from your property yesterday evening," she said, pulling out her phone and scrolling through what I assumed were her meticulously documented HOA violations. "You were operating power tools after 7 p.m., which is a direct violation of Section 12, subsection C of our community guidelines." I stared at her in disbelief. "Barbara, I was trimming some branches that were hanging over my fence. It took me 15 minutes, and I stopped at 7:30. "The rule clearly states 7 p.m., Trevor. No exceptions." She tapped her phone screen. "This is your third violation this year. First, you painted your shutters without prior approval, even though they were the exact same color. Second, you left your trash cans visible from the street on a non-collection day. And now this." "The trash can thing was because the collection truck missed my house, and I had to leave them out for the makeup pickup," I said, feeling my frustration rising. "And I didn't think I needed approval to paint something the identical color it already was. The rules exist for a reason, Trevor. They maintain our property values and ensure our community remains prestigious." Barbara crossed her arms. "I'm issuing you a $500 fine for the noise violation. Additionally, I need to confiscate that chainsaw." I actually laughed. "You need to what?" "Confiscate your chainsaw. Section 12, subsection C, Part 3, states that repeat offenders of noise ordinances may have their equipment temporarily seized by the HOA board until such time as they demonstrate compliance with community standards." "That's insane, Barbara. You can't just take my property." "Actually, I can. You signed the covenant when you purchased your home. If you refuse to comply, I'll have no choice but to begin lien proceedings against your property." She held out her hand like she expected me to just hand over a $500 piece of equipment. The crazy thing was, she wasn't bluffing. I had read through the covenant after the shutter incident, and buried in the 97 pages of legal jargon was indeed a clause about equipment seizure. It was clearly written by lawyers who never expected anyone to actually enforce such an absurd rule, but Barbara Wellington wasn't like most people. "Fine," I said, knowing that fighting her would just make things worse. "But I want a receipt, and I want it back within 30 days. "Of course," Barbara said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'll have Roger bring the paperwork by this afternoon." Roger was Barbara's husband, a quiet man who seemed to have given up on having opinions about 15 years ago. I felt sorry for him most of the time. I retrieved the chainsaw from my garage, along with the case and safety equipment, and handed it over to Barbara. She actually made me carry it to her Mercedes SUV parked in my driveway, and I watched her drive away with a piece of equipment I was probably going to need very soon. The ice storm started that night around 11 p.m. I was watching the news when the first reports came in about power outages in the western part of Cedar Rapids. The meteorologist was explaining how a rare combination of temperature, inversion, and moisture was creating perfect conditions for severe ice accumulation. "Residents are advised to stay indoors and avoid unnecessary travel," the meteorologist said, pointing to a radar image that showed a massive band of freezing rain moving across eastern Iowa. "We're expecting ice accumulation of up to 2 inches in some areas, which will bring down trees and power lines. This is a particularly dangerous situation because many trees still have their leaves, creating more surface area for ice to accumulate." I grabbed my phone and texted my sister Maria, who lived across town. "You seeing this weather? Stay safe," she responded immediately. "Already lost power, Heading to Josh's place. He has a generator. I walked to my window and looked outside. The streetlights were still on, casting an orange glow over Willow Creek Estates. Our neighborhood was one of those planned communities that had been built 10 years ago, with uniform houses, perfectly manicured lawns, and streets named after trees. We had oak, maple, birch, and willow streets, all converging at a central park area. It was pretty in a sterile sort of way, and the mature trees that had been preserved during construction were one of the few things that made it feel less like a suburban cookie-cutter development. Those same mature trees were about to become a major problem. I woke up at 3 a.m. to a sound like a gunshot. I bolted upright in bed, my heart racing, and then I heard it again, a sharp crack followed by a tremendous crash. I ran to the window and looked out into the darkness. The streetlights had gone out, but in the ambient light from the clouded sky, I could see ice coating everything. Every surface gleamed with a thick layer of frozen water, and as I watched, another branch snapped off the massive oak tree in my front yard and crashed onto the lawn. The power was out. I grabbed my phone and used the flashlight to navigate downstairs, where I found my emergency supplies. I had a battery-powered radio, flashlights, candles, and enough food to last a week. Living in Iowa, you learn to be prepared for severe weather. I turned on the radio and found the local news station. Catastrophic ice storm conditions across Lynn County, the reporter was saying. Over 100,000 residents without power. Multiple roads closed due to fallen trees. Emergency services are overwhelmed with calls. Residents are urged to shelter in place and not attempt to travel unless absolutely necessary. Another crack echoed through the night, this one closer. I went to my back window and saw that a large branch had fallen across my fence, crushing a section of it. The ice was still falling, coating everything in an ever-thickening layer. I tried to go back to sleep, but the sounds of breaking branches made it impossible. Every few minutes, another tree somewhere in the neighborhood would give up its fight against the weight of the ice, and the crack and crash would echo through the darkness. When dawn finally came around 6:30, I looked outside and couldn't believe what I saw. The world had been transformed into a crystal nightmare. Every surface was coated in at least 2 inches of clear ice. Trees that had stood for decades were bent double under the weight, their branches touching the ground. Many had already snapped, and the debris littered every yard and street. The massive oak tree at the corner of Maple and Birch had split down the middle and fallen across both streets, completely blocking the intersection. I could see other trees down on Oak Street and what looked like a utility pole leaning at a dangerous angle on Willow. My phone buzzed with a text from my neighbor, Dave Harrison. "You see this? We're completely blocked in," I texted back. "Yeah, is everyone on your side okay?" "So far. But the Mitchell's tree fell on their car, totaled it. Thank God they weren't in it." I got dressed in layers and prepared to go outside and assess the damage. That's when I heard the banging on my door again, that same aggressive knocking that could only be Barbara Wellington. I opened the door to find Barbara standing on my porch, looking significantly less composed than she had the day before. Her hair was disheveled, she was wearing a North Face jacket over what looked like pajamas, and her expression was one of barely controlled panic. "Trevor, we have an emergency situation," she said, her voice tight. "Yeah, I noticed the ice storm," I replied. "The entrance to the neighborhood is completely blocked. There's a tree down across the main gate and several more blocking the service entrance on the north side. We need to clear them immediately." "Have you called the city?" "Of course I called the city. They said they're prioritizing major roads and won't get to residential areas for at least 48 hours, possibly longer. We need to handle this ourselves." I looked past her at the devastation in my yard. "Okay, so call a tree service." "I've called 6 companies. They're all either not answering or they're already booked solid with emergency calls. Trevor, we have over 200 homes in this community. People need to get out for work, for medical appointments, for emergencies. We can't just sit here blocked in." "I get that, Barbara, but I don't know what you expect me to do about it." She took a deep breath, and I could see her struggling with what she was about to say. "You have a chainsaw." I actually laughed out loud. "Had. Past tense. You confiscated it yesterday, remember?" Her face went pale. "I didn't think we would need it for an emergency." "Well, that's the thing about emergencies, Barbara. They tend to happen when you least expect them." I started to close the door, but she put her hand out to stop me. "Trevor, please. I know I made a mistake. I'll return your chainsaw immediately and I'll waive the fine. I'll even waive the previous fines. Just, please help us clear these trees." I should have felt vindicated, but looking at her panicked face, I just felt tired. "Where's the chainsaw?" "In my garage, but Trevor, there's a problem." "Of course there is. I can't get to my garage. There's a tree blocking my driveway and it fell against the garage door. I can't open it." I closed my eyes and counted to 10. "So my chainsaw is trapped in your garage, which is blocked by a tree that we need a chainsaw to cut." "Yes. That's just perfect, Barbara." "I have Roger's chainsaw," she said quickly. "It's smaller than yours, a little electric one he uses for light trimming. It's in our shed. We could use that to cut through the tree blocking the garage and then get your chainsaw to handle the bigger trees." I looked out at the ice-covered landscape. Walking was going to be treacherous. Every surface was a skating rink. But Barbara was right about one thing. We needed to clear at least one exit from the neighborhood. If someone had a medical emergency or if there was a fire, we were trapped. "Fine," I said. "Let me get my ice cleats and gloves." 20 minutes later, I was carefully making my way down the street toward Barbara's house. She lived in one of the larger homes in the development, a 2-story colonial at the end of Willow Street. Walking on the ice-covered sidewalk was like trying to walk on a hockey rink. Even with cleats, I had to move slowly and carefully. I passed several neighbors who were outside surveying the damage. Tom Winters was standing in his yard, staring at a tree branch that had punched through his roof. Linda Garcia was sweeping ice off her porch with a broom, a futile gesture given that more ice was still falling. "Hey, Trevor!" Tom called out. "You heading to help clear the entrance?" "Trying to," I called back. "Need any help?" "Not yet. I'll let you know." Barbara was waiting for me at her house, standing next to her shed. "It's in here," she said, opening the door to reveal an immaculately organized storage space. Of course, Barbara's shed would be perfectly organized, with tools hanging on labeled pegboards and supplies arranged by category. She handed me Roger's electric chainsaw, which was indeed much smaller than my gas-powered Husqvarna. It was one of those battery-operated models that was fine for trimming small branches, but would struggle with anything serious. "Where's Roger?" I asked. "He left yesterday afternoon to visit his mother in Des Moines. He's stuck there now. All the highways are closed." Barbara's voice wavered slightly. "I'm worried about him. He tried to drive back this morning, but there's a 50-car pileup on E380, and the state patrol closed everything." I felt a flicker of sympathy for her. "I'm sure he's fine. Better that he's stuck there than trying to drive in this." We made our way to her garage, where a large maple tree had fallen across her driveway. The main trunk had landed against the garage door, bending it inward. It wasn't a huge tree, maybe 8 inches in diameter, but it was big enough to trap my chainsaw inside. I examined the situation, looking for the safest way to cut the tree without causing more damage. The problem with cutting fallen trees is that they're often under tension, and if you cut in the wrong place, they can snap violently and kill you. I need to make some relief cuts first," I told Barbara. "Stand back, and I mean way back. If this tree shifts, I don't want you anywhere near it." She nodded and retreated to the street. I started the electric chainsaw, which hummed to life with a high-pitched whine that was almost comical compared to the roar of a gas chainsaw. I made a small cut on the top side of the trunk, about 3 feet from where it was pressing against the garage door, watching carefully for any movement. The tree shifted slightly, but held. I made another cut on the bottom, creating a notch, and then cut through from the opposite side. The section of trunk fell away, releasing some of the tension. I repeated this process twice more, working closer to the garage door each time. On the third cut, the tree shifted dramatically. I jumped back as the trunk rolled off the garage door and crashed onto the driveway. My heart was pounding, but I was okay, and more importantly, the garage door was now accessible. Barbara rushed forward. "Is it safe?" "Should be. Try the door." She pulled on the garage door handle, and with a groan of bent metal, it opened about 3 feet, enough for us to squeeze inside. Barbara ducked under and emerged a moment later with my chainsaw. "Thank God," I muttered, taking it from her. I checked the chain tension and oil level, then pulled the starter cord. The engine roared to life, a beautiful sound under the circumstances. "Okay," I said, cutting the engine. "Let's go assess the entrance." The walk to the main entrance of Willow Creek Estates took 15 minutes, and what I saw when we got there made my stomach drop. It wasn't just one tree blocking the gate, It was 3 massive oaks, their trunks crisscrossed across the entrance road like some kind of massive game of pickup sticks. Each trunk was at least 2 feet in diameter, and they were tangled together with smaller branches and debris. This wasn't going to be a quick job. This was going to take hours, maybe days, and it was going to be dangerous as hell. Barbara stood beside me, staring at the mess. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Yeah. Can you clear it?" I walked closer, examining the trees. Maybe, but not alone and not safely. These trees are under massive tension. If I cut in the wrong place, they could roll or snap. I could get killed. What do we do? We need help, and we need to check the north entrance. Maybe that one's not as bad. We made our way across the neighborhood to the service entrance on the north side. This was a smaller gate that was normally used by landscaping trucks and delivery vehicles. When we got there, I actually swore out loud. The north entrance was even worse. A massive willow tree had fallen across the entire width of the road, and a power line was tangled in its branches, sparking intermittently. "We can't touch that," I said immediately. "That power line is still active. If anyone tries to cut that tree, they'll be electrocuted." Barbara pulled out her phone. "I'll call the power company." "Good luck with that. They've probably got 10,000 downed lines to deal with." She made the call anyway, and I could hear the frustration in her voice as she navigated through automated menus and waited on hold. Finally, she got through to a person. "Yes, this is Barbara Wellington, president of the Willow Creek Estates HOA. We have a downed power line blocking our north entrance. It's still active and sparking. We need someone here immediately." She listened for a moment, and her face fell. 3 to 5 days? That's unacceptable. We have people trapped in here. We have a medical emergency." She paused. "No, we don't have an actual emergency yet, but what if someone has a heart attack or goes into labor? You can't expect us to just sit here." Another pause. "Fine. Thank you for nothing." She ended the call and looked at me with desperation in her eyes. "They said 3 to 5 days minimum. They're prioritizing hospitals and critical infrastructure. So the north entrance is out, which means we have to clear the main entrance no matter how dangerous it is." By the time we got back to the main entrance, word had spread through the neighborhood that we were attempting to clear it. About 15 people had gathered, including Tom Winters, Linda Garcia, and a guy named Marcus Peters who I knew from neighborhood barbecues. "What's the situation?" Marcus asked. I explained the problem with the fallen trees and the tension they were under. "This is going to be dangerous. I need volunteers, but only people who have experience with chainsaws and falling trees. If you don't know what you're doing, you could get hurt or get someone else hurt." Tom stepped forward. "I used to work for a tree service in college. I can help." "I've cleared plenty of trees on my family's farm," Marcus added. "Okay, good. Everyone else, I need you to stay back at least 50 feet. When we start cutting, things can go wrong fast." Barbara tried to organize the onlookers, directing them to a safe distance. I could see her slipping back into HOA president mode, but for once, her bossiness was actually useful. I started the chainsaw and approached the first tree, a massive oak that had fallen across the road at an angle. Tom and Marcus watched as I examined it, looking for tension points. "See how this branch here is bent?" I said, pointing. "That means it's under compression. If I cut there, it's going to snap. We need to relieve the tension first by cutting away some of these smaller branches." We spent the next hour carefully trimming away branches, working our way toward the main trunks. It was exhausting work. The chainsaw was heavy and every cut had to be planned carefully. The ice made everything slippery, and several times I nearly lost my footing. Around noon, we had cleared enough branches to access the first main trunk. I made a notch cut on the upper side, then started cutting through from below. The tree shifted, groaning under its own weight, and then the section I had cut rolled free, crashing onto the ice-covered ground. "One down," Tom said, grinning despite the sweat running down his face. "2 to go," I replied. We broke for lunch, and Barbara brought out sandwiches and thermoses of hot coffee from her house. I was grateful for the warmth and the food. My arms were shaking from the vibration of the chainsaw, and my back ached from the awkward positions I had been working in. "How long until we're through?" Barbara asked. "At this rate, maybe 4 more hours, if nothing goes wrong." "What could go wrong?" "Lots of things. Chainsaw could break, someone could get hurt, one of these trees could shift wrong and crush somebody. Take your pick." She paled. "Maybe we should wait for professionals." "Barbara, the professionals aren't coming. We're on our own. We got back to work after lunch, and that's when things started to go wrong. I was cutting through the second trunk when the chain on my chainsaw snapped. 1 second I was making good progress, and the next, the chain broke and whipped around the bar with a metallic screech. I killed the engine and examined the damage. The chain was destroyed, and worse, it had gouged the guide bar. I had a spare chain at home, but the damaged bar meant the saw might not cut straight, even with a new chain. "Problem?" Marcus asked. "Chain broke. I need to go get my spare. This is going to set us back at least an hour." I trudged back to my house, retrieved the spare chain from my garage, and spent 20 minutes replacing it and adjusting the tension. When I got back to the entrance, I found Barbara arguing with a woman I didn't recognize. "I don't care about your rules," the woman was shouting. "My mother is in a nursing home in Cedar Rapids. She's diabetic and she needs her insulin. I need to get out of here now." "Mrs. Patterson, I understand your concern, but we're working as fast as we can," Barbara said, trying to keep her voice calm. "You told me this morning you'd have the road clear by noon. It's almost 2 p.m. The situation is more complicated than we initially thought." "My mother could die," Mrs. Patterson said, her voice breaking. "Do you understand that? She could die because you people can't get your act together." I stepped in. "Madam, I'm the one doing the cutting. We've hit some setbacks, but we're making progress. I promise you we're going as fast as we can safely go." Mrs. Patterson turned her anger on me. "I don't care about safe. I care about my mother. If we do this wrong, someone could get killed right here, right now. Would that help your mother?" She stared at me for a moment, tears running down her face, then turned and walked away. I felt terrible, but I didn't know what else to say. "There are 6 other families with urgent situations," Barbara said quietly. "The Hendersons need to get to the hospital for chemotherapy. The Nguyens have a daughter with special needs who needs medication. Jake Murphy is a firefighter who's supposed to be on shift. They're all counting on us." "No pressure or anything," I muttered, starting the chainsaw again. The afternoon wore on. We finished the second trunk around 3 p.m., but the third tree was the worst. It had fallen in such a way that it was tangled with the other 2, and it was under tremendous tension. I could see the stress in the wood, the way it was bent and twisted. "This is the dangerous one," I told Tom and Marcus. "When I cut this, it's going to move fast. I need you 2 to have ropes attached to it, and as soon as I make my cut, you pull to the side. Try to control which way it falls." "How do we attach ropes to it?" Tom asked. "Very carefully." We spent 30 minutes rigging up a system using climbing rope that Marcus had at his house. We wrapped the ropes around the trunk at 2 points and had teams of volunteers ready to pull. It wasn't a professional setup, but it was the best we could do. "Everyone ready?" I called out. A chorus of affirmatives came back. I positioned my chainsaw at the cut point, took a deep breath, and started cutting. The saw bit into the wood, throwing sawdust and ice chips. I could feel the tension in the tree through the vibration of the saw. "Get ready," I shouted. I was about 3/4 through the cut when the tree moved. It happened so fast that I barely had time to react. The trunk shifted violently, and the chainsaw was nearly ripped from my hands. I killed the engine and jumped back as the tree rolled, pulled by the rope teams. For a horrible moment, I thought it was going to swing toward the volunteers, but the ropes held and the tree crashed onto the clear part of the road, away from everyone. There was a moment of silence, and then everyone started cheering. The main entrance was clear. I set down the chainsaw, my hands shaking from adrenaline. Tom came over and slapped me on the back. "That was incredible, man." "That was terrifying," I corrected. Barbara was crying. Actual tears were running down her face as she surveyed the cleared entrance. "Thank you," she said. "Trevor, I can't thank you enough. You saved us." "Yeah, well, maybe next time don't confiscate someone's chainsaw right before a major ice storm." She laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. "Lesson learned. I promise you. Lesson learned." Over the next hour, cars started making their way out of the neighborhood. Mrs. Patterson was one of the first to leave, and she stopped to apologize to me before she went. "I'm sorry for yelling at you," she said. "I was scared and I took it out on you." "It's okay. I hope your mother's all right." "Me too." I watched the stream of cars leaving and felt a sense of satisfaction. We had done it. It hadn't been pretty or professional, but we had done it. That night, I collapsed into bed exhausted. My whole body ached and my hands were covered in blisters despite the gloves. But we had cleared the entrance. People could get in and out. Emergency services could reach us if needed. I woke up the next morning to another round of aggressive knocking on my door. When I opened it, expecting to see Barbara, I instead found 2 police officers standing on my porch. "Trevor Brennan?" the first officer asked. "That's me. Is something wrong?" "We need to ask you some questions about the tree removal that took place yesterday at the entrance to your neighborhood." My stomach dropped. "What about it? May we come in?" I let them into my living room, my mind racing. What had gone wrong? Had someone been hurt and I didn't know about it? The officers introduced themselves as Officer Davis and Officer Martinez. They sat on my couch while I took the chair across from them. "Mr. Brennan, we received a complaint from the Cedar Rapids Parks Department," Officer Davis said. "According to their records, 3 of the trees you removed yesterday were on city property. You didn't have a permit to remove them." They were blocking the entire entrance to the neighborhood. We were trapped. I called the city and they said it would be 2 days before they could get here. "Did you speak with the Parks Department specifically?" "I don't know. Barbara called the city. I don't know who she talked to." "And Barbara is?" "Barbara Wellington. She's the HOA president." Officer Martinez made a note. "The city is pretty upset. Those were mature oak trees, over 80 years old. They're saying the value of the trees was approximately $50,000. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. $50,000? They were already fallen. They were dead. Not according to the Parks Department. They're saying the trees could have been saved with proper professional removal, but because you cut them up, they're a total loss." "That's insane. The trees were split down the middle. They were done." "That's between you and the city. We're just here to document the complaint." Officer Davis looked uncomfortable. "Look, off the record, I think this is ridiculous. You did what you had to do in an emergency, but the Parks Department is pushing this and we have to follow up." They took my statement, got Barbara's contact information, and left. I sat in my living room, feeling numb. I had spent an entire day doing backbreaking, dangerous work to help my neighbors, and now I was potentially on the hook for $50,000. I called Barbara and told her about the police visit. She was silent for a long moment. "They're saying the trees were worth $50,000, she finally said. "That's what the cops told me." "Let me make some calls. This is my fault. I'll handle it." Over the next few days, the situation got worse before it got better. The local news picked up the story, but they framed it as "homeowner illegally cuts down historic trees," rather than "neighborhood trapped by ice storm." My phone rang constantly with reporters wanting comments. The city sent me a letter demanding restitution for the trees. Then, Barbara did something I didn't expect. She called a lawyer. His name was Gregory Chang, and he specialized in property law. Barbara paid for a consultation, and the 3 of us met in his office a week after the ice storm. "This is actually a pretty interesting case," Gregory said, leaning back in his chair. "The city is claiming the trees were on city property, but I've reviewed the plat maps, and it's not clear where the property line actually is. The entrance to your development is a private road, not a city street." "So the trees might have been on HOA property?" Barbara asked. "Possibly. More importantly, there's a strong case for necessity defense. You were faced with an emergency situation. You contacted the authorities, they couldn't help, and you took reasonable action to ensure public safety. That's a textbook necessity defense." "What about the value of the trees?" I asked. $50,000 seems ridiculous." "It is ridiculous. The city is using replacement value, which is a formula based on the size and species of the trees. But these trees were already down. They were damaged. Their actual value was probably closer to $5,000, and even that's debatable." He looked at both of us seriously. "I think we should fight this. The city is overreaching. They're trying to use you as an example, but the circumstances don't support their case." Barbara looked at me. "Trevor, I'll pay for the lawyer. This is my fault. If I hadn't taken your chainsaw, you could have cleared those trees hours earlier, maybe before they fell on city property. This is on me." I was surprised by her acceptance of responsibility. The old Barbara would have deflected and blamed others. Maybe the ice storm had changed her. "We fight together," I said. "Let's do this." The case took 3 months to work its way through the system. Gregory filed a motion to dismiss, arguing necessity defense and disputing the property line. The city fought back, bringing in their own lawyers and tree experts. It became a big deal in Cedar Rapids. The local news covered it extensively, and public opinion was split. Some people thought I was a hero who had done what needed to be done. Others thought I was a reckless vigilante who had destroyed valuable city trees. The case finally went before a judge in late August. The courtroom was packed with people from Willow Creek Estates, along with city officials and curious onlookers. The city presented their case first. They brought in an arborist who testified that the trees could have been saved with professional help. They showed photos of the cut trees and argued that I had acted recklessly. Then Gregory presented our defense. He called witnesses from the neighborhood who testified about the emergency conditions, the trapped residents, and the urgent medical needs. He brought in our own arborist who testified that the trees were too damaged to save. He showed the timeline of calls to the city and their responses. Finally, I took the stand. The city's lawyer tried to make me look reckless and irresponsible, but I stuck to the facts. I explained my experience with chainsaws, the safety precautions we took, and the emergency situation we faced. "Mr. Brennan, did you consider the value of these trees before you cut them?" the city's lawyer asked. "I considered the value of human life," I replied. "We had over 200 families trapped. Some of them had medical needs. If there had been a fire or a heart attack, people could have died. I made the choice to prioritize people over trees." The judge took 2 weeks to issue his ruling. When the decision came, it was better than we had hoped. Judge Patricia Chen ruled that the trees were on the boundary between city property and HOA property, making ownership unclear. More importantly, she found that the necessity defense applied. She wrote in her decision that, when faced with an emergency situation, reasonable citizens may take reasonable action to protect life and property. Mr. Brennan's actions, while unfortunate for the trees in question, were justified under the circumstances. She dismissed all claims against me and ordered the city to pay our legal fees. I got the news from Gregory over the phone, and I actually whooped with joy. Barbara called me 5 minutes later, crying again. "We won," she said. "Trevor, we actually won." "Yeah, we did." "I need to tell you something," she said. "This whole experience has made me realize what a terrible HOA president I've been. I've been so focused on rules and property values that I forgot about the actual people who live here. I'm resigning from the board." I was shocked. "Barbara, you don't have to do that." "Yes, I do. I've already talked to Roger about it. We're actually thinking about moving. We need a fresh start, somewhere where I can be less of a control freak." She laughed. "Roger's pretty excited about living somewhere without an HOA. Well, wherever you end up, I hope you're happy." "Thank you, Trevor, for everything. You saved us during that storm, and you handled this whole legal mess with more grace than I deserved." After Barbara resigned, the HOA held elections for a new president. To my surprise, several people nominated me. I declined, suggesting Marcus Peters instead. He had been level-headed during the ice storm, and he had a background in community organizing. Marcus won the election, and one of his first acts was to revise the HOA covenant. He formed a committee to go through all 97 pages and remove the ridiculous rules. The equipment seizure clause was the first to go, along with about 50 other absurd provisions. The new covenant was only 23 pages long and focused on actual community concerns like maintenance, shared expenses, and genuine safety issues. You could paint your shutters any color you wanted. You could leave your trash cans visible from the street, and you could use power tools after 7 p.m. within reason. Life in Willow Creek Estates got a lot better after that. Without Barbara's constant enforcement of petty rules, people started actually enjoying living there. Neighbors talked to each other more. We had block parties. The community park got more use. I kept my chainsaw in my garage, properly maintained and ready to go. Every time I saw it, I thought about that ice storm and everything that came after. It was funny how one of the worst experiences of my life had led to so many positive changes. The trees at the entrance grew back, sort of. The city planted new ones, smaller oaks that would take decades to reach the size of the ones we had cut. Every time I drove past them, I felt a little pang of guilt, but I also knew I had made the right choice. 6 months after the ice storm, I was in my garage working on a project when I heard a knock on the door. When I opened it, I found Barbara standing there with Roger. "Hi, Trevor," she said, smiling. She looked different, more relaxed. Her hair was longer, pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she was wearing jeans and a casual sweater. "Barbara, Roger, good to see you. I thought you guys moved." "We did. We're living in Marion now, in a neighborhood with no HOA. It's wonderful." She held out a bottle of wine. "I wanted to give you this. It's from Roger and me, a thank you for everything." I took the bottle, a nice red that probably cost more than I usually spent on wine. "You didn't have to do this." "Yes, we did," Roger said, speaking up for the first time. His voice was warm. "You helped us when we needed it most, even after Barbara had treated you so badly. That means something." "We're actually doing really well," Barbara continued. "I've been seeing a therapist, working on my control issues. Roger and I have been taking ballroom dancing classes. Did you know he's always wanted to dance? I never let him before because I thought it was silly." She looked at her husband with genuine affection. "Turns out, he's really good at it." "That's great," I said, meaning it. "I'm happy for you guys. Anyway, we just wanted to stop by and say thank you one more time. You're a good man, Trevor Brennan. This neighborhood is lucky to have you." After they left, I opened the wine and poured myself a glass. I sat on my porch, looking out at Willow Creek Estates. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawns. A group of kids was playing basketball in the street. Someone was grilling in their backyard, and the smell of cooking meat drifted on the evening air. It was a nice place to live. It had taken an ice storm, a legal battle, and a complete restructuring of the HOA to make it that way. But it had been worth it. I raised my glass in a silent toast to Barbara and Roger, to Marcus and his sensible leadership, to all my neighbors who had worked together during the ice storm. We had been through something difficult together, and it had made us stronger. My phone buzzed with a text from Maria. "Hey, we're having a barbecue next Saturday. You coming?" I texted back. "Wouldn't miss it." Life was good. The ice storm had been a disaster, the legal battle had been stressful, and dealing with Barbara's HOA tyranny had been frustrating. But in the end, it had all worked out. The neighborhood was better, the rules were reasonable, and I still had my chainsaw. The following spring brought new changes to Willow Creek Estates. Marcus organized a community garden on the unused land behind the park. The old HOA rules would never have allowed it, but under the new covenant, it was approved unanimously. I volunteered to help with the construction, and we spent several weekends building raised beds and installing a drip irrigation system. Working in the garden, I got to know neighbors I had never really talked to before. There was Susan Keller, a retired teacher who knew everything about heirloom tomatoes. David Chen was a software engineer who approached gardening with the same analytical mindset he used for coding. And then there was Margaret Foster, who had lived in the neighborhood since it was first built and had stories about every family that had come and gone. "You know, before the ice storm, this place felt sterile," Margaret told me one afternoon as we planted cucumber seeds. "Everyone kept to themselves. Barbara's rules made people afraid to do anything that might attract attention. Now, people actually talk to each other." "You think the ice storm changed things that much?" I asked. "The ice storm showed people what really matters. When you're trapped and scared, you don't care about whether your neighbor's trash cans are visible from the street. You care about whether they're okay, whether they need help, whether you can count on each other." She was right. The ice storm had stripped away the petty concerns and revealed what was actually important. Community wasn't about enforcing rules, it was about people helping people. In June, Marcus called an HOA meeting to discuss the budget for the next year. In the past, these meetings had been sparsely attended, mostly because Barbara ran them like a dictator, and nobody wanted to deal with her. This time, nearly 100 residents showed up. Marcus presented a budget that included funds for the community garden, for improved lighting in the park, and for an emergency preparedness fund. That last item had been my suggestion. "The ice storm caught us unprepared," I told the assembly. "We should have emergency supplies staged and ready to go. Generator, portable lights, a couple of chainsaws with extra chains and fuel, first aid supplies, emergency communication equipment. If something like that happens again, we'll be ready." The budget passed unanimously, and Marcus appointed me to head the Emergency Preparedness Committee. It was ironic, given that a year ago Barbara had been fining me for petty violations. and now I was being trusted with community safety. We used the emergency fund to purchase 2 high-quality gas chainsaws, a generator, LED floodlights, and a comprehensive first aid kit. Everything was stored in a locked shed near the entrance, with keys held by Marcus, myself, and 3 other designated volunteers. We created an emergency phone tree and ran drills to make sure everyone knew what to do in various scenarios. The work was fulfilling in a way I hadn't expected. For the first time since moving to Willow Creek Estates, I felt like I was part of something real, not just a homeowner who happened to live in a particular development. In August, we had a scare. A severe thunderstorm rolled through Cedar Rapids with straight-line winds that topped 70 miles per hour. Trees came down, power went out, and for a few hours it looked like we might have another emergency on our hands, but this time, we were ready. The emergency committee activated our phone tree, and within an hour, we had volunteers positioned at both entrances, the generator running the floodlights and the chainsaws ready to go. We ended up only needing to clear 1 small tree from the main road, and the whole operation went smoothly. After the storm, Marcus and I stood near the entrance, watching the last of the volunteers head home. "That went well," he said. "Yeah, big difference from last year. You ever hear from Barbara?" "She stopped by a few months ago. She and Roger seem happy. She's working on herself, dealing with her control issues." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "You know, I almost feel bad for her. She spent so much energy trying to make this place perfect according to her vision, and she missed the whole point of what makes a community good." "What's that?" "Flexibility, resilience, people caring about each other more than they care about rules." He clapped me on the shoulder. "You taught us that during the ice storm. When the rules didn't make sense, you did what needed to be done. That took guts." "I just cut down some trees." "You did a lot more than that, Trevor. You stood up to authority when it was wrong. You took responsibility when you didn't have to. You showed everyone what real leadership looks like." I felt embarrassed by the praise, but also proud. The ice storm had been terrifying and the legal battle had been stressful, but I had done the right thing. Sometimes, that was all you could do. That fall, the community garden produced an incredible harvest. We had more tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, and squash than we knew what to do with. Susan organized a harvest festival in the park, and nearly the entire neighborhood showed up. People brought dishes made with vegetables from the garden, and we had a potluck that lasted until well after dark. I stood at the edge of the park, watching families laughing and talking, kids running around playing tag, neighbors who had once been strangers now chatting like old friends. This was what community was supposed to be. My phone rang. It was an unknown number, but I answered anyway. "Is this Trevor Brennan?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes? Who's calling?" "My name is Jennifer Walsh. I'm a reporter with the Des Moines Register. I'm doing a follow-up story on the ice storm from last year and the court case that followed. I was hoping I could interview you." I almost said no. I had dealt with enough reporters during the court case, and most of them had been more interested in controversy than in truth. But something in Jennifer's voice made me reconsider. "What angle are you going for?" I asked. "I want to talk about how communities respond to disasters and how sometimes the official rules and procedures don't match up with what people actually need. Your case was a perfect example of that tension. You did what you thought was right. The authorities said you were wrong, and the courts ultimately sided with you. I think there's an important story there about how we balance rules with common sense." "Okay," I said. "I'll talk to you." We set up an interview for the following week. Jennifer came to my house with a photographer, and we talked for over an hour. I told her about the ice storm, about Barbara confiscating my chainsaw, about the dangerous work of clearing the trees, and about the legal battle that followed. "What was the hardest part?" she asked. I thought about it. The uncertainty. When those police officers showed up at my door and told me I might owe $50,000, I felt like my whole life was falling apart. I had done what I thought was right, and I was being punished for it. "Do you regret what you did?" "No. If I had to do it over, I'd make the same choice. Those trees needed to come down. People were trapped. Someone could have died. Trees can be replaced. People can't." The article came out 2 weeks later on the front page of the Register's Sunday edition. Jennifer had done a thorough job interviewing not just me but also several of my neighbors, the judge who had ruled on the case, and even Barbara. The article painted a nuanced picture of what had happened, acknowledging both the city's concerns about proper procedures and the reality of the emergency we had faced. The best part was Barbara's quote. She had told Jennifer, "I made mistakes as HOA president. I was so concerned with enforcing rules that I lost sight of why those rules existed in the first place. Trevor Brennan did what needed to be done, and I'm grateful to him for that. He taught me an important lesson about leadership and community." After the article came out, I got calls and emails from people all over Iowa. Some were from other HOA residents dealing with similar issues of overreaching boards and petty enforcement. Others were from city officials who wanted to understand how to better handle emergency situations. A few were from lawyers who saw opportunities to challenge other absurd HOA rules. One email stood out. It was from a professor at the University of Iowa College of Law, asking if I would be willing to speak to her class about the case. She taught a course on property law and emergency powers, and she thought my experience would be valuable for her students. I agreed, and on a cold November afternoon, I found myself standing in front of 40 law students, telling them about the ice storm and everything that followed. They asked thoughtful questions about necessity defense, about the balance between property rights and public safety, about how to determine when breaking a rule is justified. The law has to be flexible enough to account for real-world situations, I told them. Rules are important, but they're not more important than human life and safety. When those two things conflict, you have to be willing to do what's right, even if it means breaking the rules. One student raised her hand. "But how do you know when it's okay to break the rules? What if everyone just decided they could ignore laws whenever they thought they had a good reason?" "That's the hard question," I admitted. "I don't have a perfect answer, but I think you have to look at the specific circumstances. Was there a genuine emergency? Were the authorities able to help? Did you take reasonable precautions? Were you acting in good faith? If you can answer yes to those questions, then maybe breaking the rule is justified." The professor thanked me after the class, and several students came up to talk to me individually. One of them, a young woman named Rachel, told me that my case had inspired her to focus on HOA law for her thesis. "There are so many communities dealing with overreaching HOAs," she said. "Your case could be a blueprint for challenging unreasonable rules and standing up for homeowner rights." Driving home from Iowa City, I thought about how far things had come since that day when Barbara had confiscated my chainsaw. What had started as a petty HOA dispute had become a legal case that might help other people facing similar situations. It felt good to know that something positive had come from all the stress and uncertainty. Winter came, and Cedar Rapids braced for another ice storm season. The Weather Service warned that conditions were similar to the previous year, and everyone was nervous. But this time, Willow Creek Estates was prepared. We tested the generator, checked the chainsaws, reviewed our emergency procedures, and made sure everyone had the contact information for the phone tree. The storms came, but they weren't as severe as the previous year. We had a few power outages and some downed branches, but nothing that required major intervention. Still, it was reassuring to know that we were ready if something worse happened. In February, I got a letter from the city of Cedar Rapids. For a moment, I felt a flash of anxiety, wondering if they were going to try to sue me again. But when I opened it, I found something completely different. The letter was from the mayor's office, informing me that I had been selected to receive a community service award for my actions during the ice storm. The ceremony would be held in March at City Hall, and I was invited to attend with guests. I called Marcus. "Did you have anything to do with this?" "Maybe," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "You deserve it, Trevor. You saved our neighborhood. The city should recognize that." The award ceremony was surprisingly moving. The mayor gave a speech about the importance of community resilience and ordinary citizens who step up in extraordinary circumstances. When he called my name and I walked up to receive the plaque, the audience stood and applauded. I saw Marcus and his family there, Susan from the community garden, Tom and Linda from the ice storm, and dozens of other neighbors from Willow Creek Estates. After the ceremony, a city council member approached me. His name was Robert Hayes, and he had been one of the officials pushing to prosecute me after the tree removal. "Mr. Brennan, I owe you an apology," he said. "I was wrong about your case. I was so focused on protecting city property that I didn't see the bigger picture. You did the right thing, and I should have recognized that from the start." "Thank you," I said, shaking his hand. "I appreciate you saying that." The city has actually changed some of our emergency response policies because of what happened, and we now have protocols in place for situations where residents might need to take emergency action before official help can arrive. Your case helped us realize that we need to be more flexible. That might have been the most satisfying outcome of the whole experience. Not just that I had been vindicated, but that the system itself had changed to be more reasonable. Spring arrived, and the community garden came back to life. We expanded it that year, adding more beds in a greenhouse that David Chen designed and built with help from volunteers. More families joined the gardening club, and it became a hub of neighborhood activity. One Saturday morning in April, I was working in the garden when a car pulled up and Barbara got out. I hadn't seen her since her visit the previous year, and I was surprised to see her. "Trevor, hi," she said, walking over. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all. What brings you by?" "I wanted to show you something." She pulled out her phone and showed me a photo of a garden. "Roger and I started a community garden in our new neighborhood. We used your garden here as a model. It's been amazing. People love it." "That's great, Barbara. I'm happy for you." "I've been thinking a lot about leadership lately," she said. "When I was HOA president here, I thought leadership meant enforcing rules and maintaining standards. But I was wrong. Real leadership is about bringing people together and helping them work toward common goals. You showed me that. I was just trying to help during an emergency. It was more than that. You stood up when it mattered. You made hard choices. You brought the community together. That's real leadership." She paused. "I wanted to thank you for that, for teaching me what I should have known all along." We talked for a while longer, and I learned that Barbara had become involved in local politics in Marion. She was running for city council on a platform of community engagement and reasonable governance. The old Barbara would have never admitted her mistakes or tried to do better. The new Barbara was someone I could actually respect. After she left, I went back to working in the garden. The sun was warm, the soil was rich and dark, and the first shoots of spring vegetables were pushing up through the earth. It was good, honest work, and I was surrounded by neighbors who had become real friends. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Maria. "You coming to dinner tonight? Kids want to see Uncle Trevor." I smiled and texted back. "Wouldn't miss it." That evening, sitting around Maria's dinner table with my sister and her family, I thought about how much had changed in the past year. The ice storm had been a disaster, but it had led to so many positive changes. Barbara had transformed from a petty tyrant into someone genuinely trying to do better. The HOA had gone from an oppressive bureaucracy to an actual community organization. I had gone from being a guy who kept his head down and avoided conflict to someone who stood up for what was right. "Uncle Trevor, tell us about the ice storm again," Maria's youngest, Emma, said. "Again? I've told you that story a dozen times. But it's so cool. You cut down giant trees and saved everyone, and then you won in court like a hero." "I wouldn't say hero. I just did what needed to be done." "That's what heroes do," Emma said with the absolute certainty only an 8-year-old can muster. Maria smiled at me from across the table. "She's right, you know. You are a hero. Maybe not the cape-wearing kind, but the real kind. The kind who steps up when people need help." I felt my face get hot. "Can we talk about something else?" But Emma wasn't done. "Are you going to help if there's another ice storm?" "If there's another ice storm, our neighborhood is ready. We have equipment, we have plans, we have people trained to help. We won't be caught unprepared again." "Because of you," Emma said. "Because of everyone. It takes a whole community working together." Later that night, driving home through the quiet streets of Cedar Rapids, I thought about Emma's words. Was I a hero? I didn't feel like one. I felt like an ordinary guy who had been put in an extraordinary situation and had tried his best to do the right thing. But maybe that's what being a hero really was. Not having superpowers or being fearless, but just being willing to act when action was needed. Being willing to stand up even when it was hard, even when you might face consequences, even when you were scared. The ice storm had tested me in ways I never expected. It had forced me to make difficult choices, to take risks, to challenge authority when authority was wrong. And in the process, it had changed me. I was more confident now, more willing to speak up, more connected to my community. I pulled into my driveway and looked at my house, at the neighborhood around me. Willow Creek Estates wasn't perfect, but it was home. It was a place where people looked out for each other, where we came together when times were tough, where we had learned that community was more important than rules. Inside my garage, my chainsaw sat on its shelf, clean and maintained, ready for whatever might come. I hoped I would never need it for another emergency, but if I did, I would be ready. We all would be. That was the real lesson of the ice storm. Not that rules didn't matter, but that people mattered more. Not that we should ignore laws and procedures, but that we should be willing to question them when they didn't make sense. Not that one person could solve every problem, but that a community working together could overcome almost anything. I went inside, poured myself a glass of the wine Barbara had given me months ago, and sat on my couch. The house was quiet, peaceful. Outside, the neighborhood was settling in for the night. Lights were on in windows, families were together, and somewhere in the distance I could hear kids playing basketball. Life was good. The ice storm and everything that followed had been hard, but it had made Willow Creek Estates into a real community. It had changed Barbara, changed the HOA, changed me. And most importantly, it had shown everyone that when we worked together and looked out for each other, we could handle whatever challenges came our way. I raised my glass in a silent toast to the community, to the neighbors who had worked alongside me during the ice storm, to Marcus and his sensible leadership, to Barbara and her journey toward becoming a better person, to Judge Chen for her wisdom, to Gregory Chang for his excellent legal work, and to everyone who had played a part in turning a disaster into an opportunity for positive change. The ice storm was over. The trees were gone. But what we had built in its aftermath, a real community based on mutual respect and cooperation that would last for years to come. And that made all the struggle worthwhile. I finished my wine, turned off the lights, and went to bed, grateful for where I lived, for the people around me, and for the lessons I had learned about what really mattered in life. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities, but tonight I could rest easy, knowing that whatever came next, Willow Creek Estates would face it together as a true community should.